So Russia's economy is on the ropes, and you don't have to be an economist to know that 3 years of a wartime footing where you're just spending money wantonly on war rather than actually building things and becoming more productive, that's going to create a more robust society, is going to have an effect after some time. So this is where Putin is, and I'm going to show you three big buckets of things that are happening to the Russian economy right now. And like I see some videos, it's going to collapse tomorrow. I don't know that it's going to collapse tomorrow, but it is ailing, and I'll show you definitively proof that it is ailing from the words from the mouths of those in charge, begrudgingly saying we're on the verge of recession and other things along those lines. So I'll show you first that bucket, and then the oil and gas bucket, and then the other economies bucket, and I'll show you. Wait till we're done. I'll show you the solution that some state Duma members have had, and it's going to blow your mind. Okay, so let's start here, and I'm going to do this chronologically from about 3 weeks ago, about early June, and it's now June 25th, 2025 as I'm speaking. So June 4th, we see Russia's National Welfare Fund continues to vanish, down another $4 billion in May, leaving only $36 billion in liquid assets. It keeps going down and down and down and down. Kremlin's budget disaster in May 25, budget revenues fell 6% year over year for the first time in 1.5 years against the backdrop of 10% inflation. It's probably more than that. The drop in revenues in real terms is 16%. That's June 10th. Okay, Russia's national debt has turned into a classic pyramid. All income goes into debt repayment and interest payments, well, much of it at least. Revenue for 5 months was 1.65 trillion rubles. The debt repayment was 0.45 trillion, and the service costs on that debt is 1.12 trillion. So that only leaves 0.08 trillion left to do anything else with. And that was on June 12th. Okay, keep going. Anton Gerashenko talking about this. The International Economic Forum in Russian St. Petersburg is discussing that Russia is on the verge of a recession. They were saying it. I'm not making this up. Russian Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, said, quote, according to the figures, we're seeing a cooling, but all our figures are like a rearview mirror based on current business sentiment and leading indicators. I think we're on the verge of slipping into a recession. Now, he's challenged by the chairman of the State Duma Committee on Budget and Taxes, Andrei Makarov, saying, are we going to fall in? You're the minister of the economy. Say something optimistic. Otherwise, the whole internet will be saying Reshetnikov predicted recession. Reshetnikov replies, I didn't predict anything. I just said we're standing on the edge. What happens next depends on the decisions that we make. That is the way it works. And yeah, they're on the edge of a recession, and they're admitting it. Now, what's the date here? This was on June 19th. Here we see economic slowdown. All forecasts this year, forecasted by the central bank, forecast by experts, forecast by ministries of economic development, as well as industry and trade, turned out to be more optimistic than the actual situation in the markets, says the Surbank CEO Gref. Okay, that's June 21st, but it sounded like they're saying that this is optimistic, this is positive. They're saying exactly the opposite. Our forecasts were wrong. They were more optimistic than the actual situation, which means this actual situation is far worse, but they're not saying it that way. Again, this is June 21st. It's June 25th today. Here we are, Anton Gerashenko again, talking about, again, the resources that had enabled the Russian economy to grow for 2 years under the conditions of war and sanctions have been exhausted, according to the governor of the Bank of Russia, Elvira Nabiullina. Quote, we have experienced relatively high growth over the past 2 years because we were able to tap into unused resources and labor. The reserves have largely been used up, and many companies are now facing a labor shortage. Well, you can count about 1 million that we know where that went. Additionally, we had financial resources accumulated in the National Wealth Fund, which have been directed toward investment. We had capital reserves in the banking system, which served as a foundation for accelerated lending, but many of these resources have indeed been depleted. Okay, the National Wealth Fund's liquid assets have decreased threefold since the start of the war, down 2.8 trillion rubles, or about $35 billion US dollars. Experts at Ranipa have warned that this reserve could fully be depleted by 2026. That's just around the corner. And this was again just a few days ago on June 20th. Here is the State Duma has said that Russia may share the fate of the USSR. Listen to this. There is no money, but hang in there. Even members of United Russia are now speaking about the massive problems in the economy, which can no longer be concealed or ignored. Shocked officials haven't heard such blasphemy in a long time. Andrei Makarov, head of the State Duma Committee on Budget and Taxes, stated that Russia may share the fate of the USSR if the state lacks the funds to meet the needs of the population. According to him, the Soviet Union collapsed not because Gorbachev or Yeltsin, but because it failed to fulfill the main economic law, the maximum satisfaction of the ever-growing needs of the working people. Well, I mean, they never really maximized the satisfaction. The real reason that the Soviet Union collapsed was they just couldn't maintain this broken system. It was just too cost prohibitive. That's what led to perestroika and glasnost. The openness was because we can't really pay for it anymore. Okay, now Russia faces the same problem. According to the finance ministry, the liquid assets of the National Welfare Fund have dropped threefold, and as of June 1st, amounted only to 2.8 trillion rubles. The economy has slowed from 4.1% growth last year to 1.4% in the first quarter of 2025. And that's the official figure, which is probably lower than that. Shoikin, head of the RSPP, stated that many companies are in pre-default state. Well, of course they are, because you've robbed them blind trying to gin up your military system, and now there's no demand, there's no workers, you got a huge problem. Okay. Oh, by the way, that was June 20th. Okay. Head of Russia's central bank, Elvira Nabiulina, gave quite a candid take. Growth over the past 2 years came from tapping idle resources, unused labor, spare capacity, bank capital, wealth fund. Her warning, many of these resources are truly exhausted. Again, June 24th. Today's the 25th. Tick, tick, tick. A war economy can only last so long, says Garry Kasparov. If Europe stopped funding Russia with energy purchases and the U.S. applied strong sanctions, Putin would be forced to end the war. That's right. He said this just a couple days ago, and today, what does Rubio say? Or yesterday, Rubio said this, and it was reported today, crushing Russia with sanctions would jeopardize Ukrainian peace talks. I talked about that in the Daily Brief this morning. Why? Because they're talking to us, but if we applied these sanctions, they wouldn't talk to us anymore. It's exactly the wrong formula. Okay, now, some of the headlines here. Russia's economy minister says the country is on the brink of recession. Russia on the brink of recession, says the economy minister. Putin says Russian recession must not happen under any circumstances. Putin says he won't allow Russia to fall into recession and warning. So the comment here was, as your dictator, I order you, Russian economy, not to fall into recession under any circumstances. But you can't really it just doesn't work like that. So Putin's military binge is bleeding the Russian economy dry. The government is stuck between inflation and stagnation with few options left. Okay, so let's look at oil and gas revenue, because that's about a third of the Russian budget is predicated on that. So this goes back to June 4th, and we're going to start over and work our way back through the month. Russia's tax revenues from oil were down 32% year over year in May of 25, and the lowest since just after the start of the G7 cap. This is the combined effect of massive U.S., U.K., and EU sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet and lower oil prices. Sanctions work. Well, they can work if they're applied correctly. So let me show you the chart here too, so you can just see how it's just diminishing. Okay, sinking. Russia's oil, this is June 5th, Russia's oil exports are now under severe pressure with a dramatic 29% weekly drop in crude shipments. This signals a new stage in the unraveling of the Kremlin's war economy. Here is June 5th again. Economic sectors, according to the Russian government, showing oil and gas revenue down 106% for the month of March for the sector. Russian oil companies now losing money. Here is June 6th. Russian oil exports fell 29% in the final week of May, plunging from 495,000 to 352,000 tons per day, the sharpest weekly drop since the full-scale invasion. And this is from Timothy Milovanov, who is the former economic minister in Ukraine. Okay. June 6th again, Russia's economy is collapsing. Again, oil is down. Gazprom net profits dropped 42% in quarter one. Kremlin ran a $40 billion deficit in just 3 months. Okay. More apocalyptic losses for Russia's energy sector. You're getting the idea, right? Okay, more. Entire Russian oil sector is now operating at a loss. Results of Russian oil companies' activities for quarter one, loss of $4 billion against $4 billion in profit a year earlier. That's staggering. This was all before the fall of oil in April, quarter two. Well, but okay, so you'd start to say, well, wait a minute. Didn't the war in Israel make the oil price go up? I'll show you that in just a moment. Now, this is June 10th. Before that happened, EU officially represents 18th sanctions package against Russia, bans use of Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline from infrastructure, lowers oil price cap from $60 to $45 a barrel. That didn't really actually take that. We're talking about doing that. The disconnects from 22 more Russian banks from SWIFT. European Commission continues tightening economic pressure. Okay, so that's where we are here. And a price of $30 for Russian oil would force Russia to seek peace. They didn't go down to 45. They weren't going to go down to 30. We ask our partners to reduce the price and really bring the end to the war closer, says Zelensky. Russian Urals oil is about $60 per barrel at that time. And I'll show you what's going on now. So, and that was June 10th. June 11th, we see this. Petrol supplies from Russia have fallen by half. It's very bad for the thing that they depend on most. And here, if the long-awaited Israeli-Iran war has only added $5 to Brent, it should finally be acknowledged the future of Russia is canceled. It was having some effect, but not a tremendous effect. It spiked up briefly and then came back down. Here is Artur Rehi on June 20th saying Russia's 2025 budget is under enormous strain because it was planned based on oil price of $80 per barrel. However, since the summer of 2024, oil prices have been steadily falling, reaching around $50 per barrel for Urals crude in the spring of 2025. Let's just look at Urals crude. So the war with Iran and Israel started somewhere over here in June and then spiked for about 12 days and then just dropped yesterday, 2 or 3 days ago. Just dropped and it's moving its way back down. So it was a temporary spike and it needs to stay far lower. If it stays below 60, the Russians are going to have a hard time. And if it goes well below that, if it goes down below 50, it's going to be really, really bad for them. Okay, let's talk about other sectors and what else is going on in other places. And then I'll tell you the State Duma's solution to this. And you've got to see this to believe it. Okay. Here, this was June 3rd. China screws Russia with severe underbidding on a nuclear reactor project. China's nuclear corporation has offered Kazakhstan to build 2 HPR 1000 reactors with a total capacity of 2.4 gigawatts for just $550 million. Russia's Rosterom quoted Kazakhstan $1.2 to $1.5 billion for the same project. Again, this image is actually really interesting because this is what's happened. China has become the big brother. Okay. Russia's automotive sales continue to collapse. This is also June 4th. With May down another 28%. It's trying to sell Russian automotive cars. Inflation's a problem. They don't have necessarily the same jobs that they would have had. Okay. Drone strikes. This is June 5th. Drone strikes paralyzed rail freight traffic in Russia. After a record 4.1% drop in 2024, freight volumes on Russian railways have fallen even further in 2025, down 9.4% year over year by May, according to the Moscow Times. Nearly all cargo categories declined. Coal is down 3.4%, oil and petroleum down 5.8%, containers down 6.2%, construction materials, the construction market there is in tatters. 20.7%. Nobody's really buying the stuff. People they're not able to build like they would otherwise be. Okay, so you can see the idea here. This is also really interesting. This was on June 6th. Foreign-made components in Russia's Kilo-class submarines in the Black Sea Fleet have reportedly been systematically stripped out to be replaced with Russian or Chinese components. However, this is said to have resulted in corruption and significant problems with reliability. They have to cannibalize from one ship to another in order to keep things afloat. literally. And then finally, on June 8th, we see this on one of the major constituents of the Russian economy. The coal industry is now in a state of collapse. Like, look at the just look at the numbers of coal mining over the last few months. It's bad. You don't have the workers. You don't yeah. Okay. Now, then you see commentary like this. Steve Rosenberg in the BBC in today's Russian papers. The Russian economy is displaying alarming symptoms. You hear of stagnation and recession. Plus, sales of residential real estate plummet by 40%. Again, the real estate market is in great danger. That's June 11th. And then I want to show you today's he's reading the Russian economy's papers. Here's today. Housing and utility tariffs to rise by 11.9%. Inflation's pretty bad. On verge of recession. Will oil prices fall below $60 a barrel? Everything I've been talking about. Let's just listen to a couple of minutes of this, and then I'll show you their wonderful solution on the other end of this. Listen to this.
Morning. Arguments and Facts reports that from July the 1st, housing and utility tariffs in Russia will increase on average by 11.9%, but in some regions by 23 to 25%. This increase will be painful for many families. A former Russian Prime Minister, Sergei Stepashin, talks about his sister in St. Petersburg. Her monthly pension is 22,000 rubles. That's about $280. But the bills for her apartment come to 18,000 rubles a month. For a little two-room apartment, if I didn't help her out, I don't know how she'd survive. The paper also reports what senior Russian officials were saying about the economy at last week's St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Central Bank Chair Elvira Nabiullina warned that many of the resources which had allowed Russia's economy to grow quite well in the last 2 years have now been exhausted. Russia's Minister for Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, said that according to the current feelings of businesses, we are already, it seems to me, on the verge of going into recession. Sberbank CEO...
Yeah, so it's all the same stuff that I was telling you. Like, they're admitting that they're doing terribly, and it's just a matter of time before something seizes up. Okay, so as the Russian economy struggles, what's the solution? Blame fat citizens. Not making this up. Blame fat citizens. Let's clarify right away. The people in the photo are members of the State Duma, clearly not the slimmest bunch. Okay, so anyway, a member of parliament, Irina Filatova, declared that 60% of Russians are overweight and that this is, in her opinion, it harms both the country's demographics and its economy. She added that obesity affects quality of life, life expectancy, and even citizens' reproductive ability. So, all right, that's the solution. Well, so now you know what the state of the Russian economy is. What are your thoughts? How long can this survive? How long can this go on? For my money, I've said for a long time, I think when you have the war will end when there's either a political or economic incident in Russia, not so much on the ground. And this is all harbingers of very bad things. Not saying it's happening tomorrow or it's all over, but it's in bad shape. All right. Thank you, my friends. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.